right, hello. Welcome to another episode of Making It in Asheville. We are your hosts, Sarah and Tony, and today we are very excited to interview the founder of Amplified Media, Jared Kay. How's it going, Jared?
Yeah. I feel like I'm talking to just the two of you, but I'm also talking to your entire audience. So that's
Yeah,
no
I mean, they're not listening right now as we record this, but they will be listening.
Heard. Yeah, the ever-growing audience that is Making It in Asheville. As of this week, Jared, so we're going to date stamp when this episode was recorded. You are now a guest on Western North Carolina's #1 local podcast.
Wow.
Did you know this? Yeah. So it looks like we might have run uncontested because we didn't see anyone in second place, but all the while, it's still pretty cool.
That's huge. Yeah. Wow.
It felt like it feels huge, considering that a year ago, or just over a year ago, we were still in Brooklyn, right? So
I met less than a year ago in person, actually, believe it or not.
Exactly.
and yeah, it was, you just moved here like a week before, and you were just, the concept of a podcast was just in its infancy. I don't even know if you were serious at that point.
Yeah, it was. That was our. I would say like the buoy that we're like, all right, even if everything the boat wrecks, hold on to this thing because I think it'll help. And so we stayed focused, but honestly, I don't want to give you too much credit, but we met at Young Professionals of Asheville.
Yeah.
And sitting down or standing actually bar side with you, and hearing I'll say the tweeted version or the soundbite version of your story,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, Sarah, there's space in town for media. Like,
oh, yeah.
He's clearly doing so. Like, I don't know who's got the podcast in town. We couldn't find one when we looked it up. I was like, maybe we could be the podcast in town.
And I remember that conversation vividly. I often meet people at those types of events, and especially when you're in a loud environment and it's chaotic. You don't often have time for a genuine and intimate conversation. But I remember the two of you stood out in a sense where, I felt like you were the new kids in town who are kind of the underdog who needed like just this little handhold, this little grasp, and so
we still do.
I felt like fighting so hard for like the inspirational perspective to give you, like this town is so inviting and it's so understanding and it's so collaborative that you can make it. Just take your dreams and run with them. So that was really a cool moment, honestly.
It was.
Yeah, I think you described that very, very well. I remember feeling like oh wow, there's so much room to grow there. So yeah. Well, Jared, tell us a little bit about tell our audience and us a little bit more about Amplified Media and what you do nowadays.
So we are a community-minded organization, and we are here to tell the stories of the organizations and the individuals within our community. So we're really just a platform. We're a storyteller. Well, actually, we're not even a storyteller. We're a platform for you to tell your story. So we're not contriving or scripting or creating something typically. We're that lens. We're that window. So we come in to an environment with kind of a blank canvas, and we'll spend a lot of time on the forefront, and we'll do pre-production and planning and collaboration. But that story, the essence of it, we want to keep it as real and genuine and as authentic as possible without trying to spin any sort of campaign or agenda or so facade. So we really pride ourselves on that genuine and authentic approach where we're really tugging at the heartstrings, and we're really, diving in deep to understand why this organization exists, and not only why they exist, but why they exist in their community. Like what makes them an integral part of maybe not the Asheville community, but their community, because they have a community, and we all have these interactions and engagements with peers and with associates and with, other organizations that if we're not putting ourselves out there in a genuine way, I think this day and age, people are savvy. They can see right through that, so I think there is that, like we were talking earlier, that room for growth in a sense where, we can all kind of create this more genuine virtual world. It's world, the virtual, world, it's not normal. It's not like we weren't as evolved as a species to interact this way. But if we do it in a genuine way where it's authentic and our stories are real, then I feel like that's doing something, that's going somewhere.
Heard.
Yeah. Well, and you just brought up the question of like, I think a lot of people, when they get in front of a camera or they know they're going to be on video or even photo, get shy and then they get awkward. Yeah. And I'm talking about myself here a lot of the times. And it can be really hard to be genuine and authentic because you feel like you have to read a script. So how do you help people through that process?
So I'll tell you, this is probably the third time in 5 years that I've been in front of the camera. So it's really like right now is that freakish moment where I'm experiencing that, which is good for me. It's a good exercise, but I'm experiencing that, that little bit of nervousness and, ooh, this could be permanent, what I'm saying may or may not stick, so I think that my biggest role as a good listener, the same as yours, in all honesty, is to meet them where they're at. And I always say, be vulnerable. Like, that's my biggest thing is like, I want to be vulnerable with that individual so that I'm not just pitching questions at them. I'm having a real conversation with them. I'm listening and I'm engaging and I'm asking follow-ups. And I'm kind of, putting them at ease in a sense where they don't feel like they're being interviewed, but they feel like they're just having a friendly conversation, or maybe they're inspiring me, and I think in that sense, it gives them the realization that this isn't just a one-sided, pitch. It's a conversation, and it's a moment.
Yeah, and I'll just say, just in case, because it wasn't, I don't think necessarily explicit, is that looks a lot of the time, as far as I understand, like video production and telling stories through video in sometimes your studio. It seems like you also have done a ton of nature or outdoors video as well.
Sure.
So like practically, and if you're not already checking out the Making It in Asheville YouTube channel, you might want to, because Jared's just taken first place all time in the best background and
best guest setup
look
for a
and
podcast.
Feel for a guest. It's going to make us totally reimagine what our look and feel is going to be moving forward. But it practically, it's video production, storytelling, and the medium typically, perhaps not always, is video.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. So to that point, if you can see this, and some of you are listening, I think letting the technology fade into the background, not putting it at the forefront. I think the story needs to be at the forefront, in all honesty. But the distractions and the audio quality and, what's behind me, that needs to fade into the background to where you're not noticing it. It's so good that you're not noticing it. If it's bad, you notice it, which is unfortunate. If you hear an audio hum, if there's a dog barking, if you see something in the video that's growing out of the top of somebody's head, that's noticeable and people are going to get distracted by it. So our role in setting up a scene and finding an aesthetic is to make everything kind of fade into the background and create an environment where the viewer feels at ease.
Yeah. And you've done that wonderfully with what I'm assuming is a fixed focal length and a depth of field that is just like buttery soft behind 30, you. Great light.
1.4. That's the lens to have. If it's just, you can't go wrong with it. But I could nerd out all day on technology, but that, just having the right lens, having the right camera, and it's tough in the virtual world. When we're all plugged into our computers and our iPhone cameras, they see everything. You don't really have, and they've gotten better. Like now I can zoom on my iPhone camera, so I'm now isolating my scene, and I'm showing the viewer only what I want them to see. A wide angle perspective where everything's in focus tends to be kind of, I want to say, like a lazy perspective. It's like, hey, here's everything. I'm giving it all away. Whereas if you really hone in and focus and say, this is what I want my audience to see, because I'm crafting a message, I'm crafting an aesthetic. Then I think that allows for that to not be a distraction. Because if it's big and wide, they're going to look around and they're going to see, you know, like things that are, for all intents and purposes, distractions, you know, like, ooh, squirrel, ooh, you know.
Yeah. Well, and that's how our eyes work, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at the computer right now.
Yeah.
And looking at you, and I'm not focusing on the background of what's in our room right now.
Uh-huh.
I find that so fascinating. Like it's mimicking the natural way that our eyes are already working.
Yeah.
So.
I remember the first time my dad was so pumped. He bought this new TV, and we were watching a football game, and grass was in focus.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh my God, like what is, grass is in focus, players are in focus. What is is this what it could have looked like the whole time?
Yeah.
And so like, that was the first, I don't know, 1080p TV that I'd ever even probably seen.
Retrain your brain. You
retrains your brain. You're like, oh, but it's not normal to be able to look at any point on a screen and have it all be clear.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife hates it. We were in a hotel like a month ago, and our TV, usually we're watching stuff on our computers at home. You know, we very rarely watch something on a big TV, and we were watching, it might've been a sporting event, and it was so hard to watch because everything was so crisp and so clear. And it just, it was distracting, you know? So, and we were talking.
Cause you don't know what to make, like, you don't know what to prioritize. Exactly. Like your brain doesn't know.
When you're staring at the grass, when you should be watching, like,
yeah. Wow. Okay, so we've just like geeked out about video for a second, but I want to take us back a little bit, well, a lot, I guess, because you've been in this business for 15 years, I believe.
Yeah, a long time. So I can give you the story kind of in a nutshell of my journey, and then we can kind of dive into any one segment of it, because it's a very interesting journey, and I didn't just fall into this, and a lot of times there's that perception that like, oh, he got, he fell into it, it just fell in his lap, whatever it may be. But, really it is an uphill struggle, and constantly, but in a good way, it's something that, I enjoy a challenge, and I always have. So I like having that, that sense of a push, whether that be from behind or from, the front. But I think, anyway, I'm digressing here, so you can.
We will not get that in post. That's live. Everyone's going to hear it forever.
Love it.
But I think that what you're setting up is a story that's going to have challenges, and so I imagine they've just changed at every step. Of the way. And
I want to start you from the beginning, but I don't know if that's exactly where, so the beginning of my video career or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But what I realized early on is to be a part of your community. If nothing else, and we talked about this when we first started, if nothing else, be a part of your community, whatever that means. It could be your local chamber of commerce. It could be your YPA. It could be, just a group of friends who are inspired and passionate about something. But I think that allows growth in a way that you can't really do otherwise. I think you need that support system. Really, it takes a village. So I learned very early on to be a part of my community. And I think that was the golden ticket for me, was really to just do good work, treat people right, and be rock solid dependable. That was like the goal. Money was secondary, and when I first started my business back in 2005. My wife and I got married in 2005. We were 20. We were young. We were poor. We just, really were, we were really just in the deep end, both feet, and we had to swim. We had to learn to swim. So she took a job where she was, I don't remember the numbers, but she was making $800 a month, and I was making $800 a month. Or my goal was to make $800 a month. We had a lease that was $800, so she would cover that. And then we had groceries and gas that cost about $800, so I tried to cover that. And that was my goal back then, was, okay, I only need, $600 to $1,000 every month to sustain, because I started so small. I didn't have the overhead, I didn't have the expenses. I took a small loan from my dad for a camera. It was like, I don't know, $2,000 or something for a camera and a microphone and and I paid him back in a year, and so I think having that mentality of like, you don't need the best equipment, you don't need the best clients, you don't need the best resources. You really just need to invest yourself into your cause, whatever that may be, and into your community, and the rest will take care of itself. So there were jobs I was doing for free. There were, I was filming weddings and kids' birthday parties, and I was doing PowerPoints for people, and I got into a little bit of web design, and so I was doing everything. And usually I was charging $100, or $200 for something that should have, cost 10 times that in a professional sense. But my goal was to do good work. And so that person, maybe they didn't pay me a lot of money, but they became my sales force. They became my audience. And so I think if you can grow that community into a sales force, and I don't call my friends and peers and associates sales force, but they are, sales force to you guys, and you guys are a potential sales force to me. Even though we have a common bond and a relationship, and you still want to preach the work of people who are doing good work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's really where it started. So I started at 20, that was almost 16 years ago now. And it was really just young and motivated, so I was still in school. In fact, I took a bunch of digital media classes, and I was going to Blue Ridge Community College, and then we ended up getting married, and my wife and I, we were both just, like I said, full in. We had to make it work. So I ended up dropping out of school and starting my business. And I had kind of a side hustle at the time. So there were two things that really launched off the production side. I was working with a local church doing church production. So we had a production department, and I'd gone to a high school that was affiliated with the church, and my wife and I were high school sweethearts. So we met our freshman year. And so the school was affiliated with the church. And so the church had this production department. They had all these cameras, and I'm like, yeah, I want to, I'll play around with that. So for a few years, I was working with them and learning the ropes and learning live production in a studio environment. And so I started editing the services and delivering them to a really small local TV station that used to be based out of Fletcher. And about 6 months into doing that, delivering the services every week on a DVD, we would take a DVD disc and deliver it to them.
Early 2000s. What a time.
Yeah. They hired me. So I had this 2 part-time jobs, and this was in 2004 maybe, and the station shut down in 2005. So they just closed house. And so I only had half a job at that point, so I had this void to fill, and I said, well, why don't I just start a business? So I did have a little bit of steady income. It wasn't much, but it was enough to say, okay, I have this little nugget. If I can just have another little nugget, then we can make ends meet. And so from my perspective, having that sense of, everyone wants a sense of security. And that's what the toughest part about going on a limb and starting your own business is. There is no sense of, you're jumping off a cliff. You hope there's a net or a parachute, So I think it is smart to have a little bit of a sense of I'm not going to fully break away from sustainability. Let's think this through a little bit.
Yeah.
And from there, once the station shut down, that was probably the best thing that had happened for me, because it gave me that really hard kick to say, okay, you got to do this. You got to make it happen. Yeah. So from then on out, I just, like I said, my focus was just doing good work and treating people right. Now, that was kind of a roundabout way to tell that story, but the focus wants to be on that, really on that community side, money coming secondary. I really,
And so that's a perfect, I think, circle back through the story of what you've said and what you did say when we met that first time is if you lean into the community, there's always opportunities. And I think what I heard through that was to serve. And if you're prioritizing being useful, I think that's always a good strategy. What you said is that you wanted to be, I forgot the way you said it, but I loved it. It was just absolutely reliable, right?
Yeah.
Dependable, solid, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think that does make sense. And I also find that when you have a little bit of, I'll call it excess oxygen every single month, it makes it perhaps a hair easier to focus on doing quality work over making money. Yep. I'm wondering if in those early days, were there moments, were there times where you're like, oh my God, I don't know if I can continue to not worry about money. Like at some point.
Oh, you're always worrying about money. You know, that is.
Or putting it third. And so I just mean at some point you changed from I'm going to say yes to everything for $100 to perhaps I get now to be a little bit more selective, or I'm going to put a price out and see if they say no to it. Like, how did the transitions from I'll do anything to get that $800 a month income marker to I'm going to now test pricing or be selective on work?
Yeah, and this is an interesting conundrum, and we've struggled with this because in our creative realm, there's no set standard of cost, really. It's like it spans the spectrum. The cool thing now is that I can take those $100 jobs, whatever they may be, and I can pass those on to someone who needs them more than I do. And so I'm in that position now where I can actually say, oh, like that may not be a good fit for us, but let me tell you about this person. They're a fantastic fit, you know, whatever the cost spectrum might be. And people were doing that with me. You know, when I started developing other relationships in the creative world, people were sending things down the ladder to me, you know, and I was sending things up the ladder to them. It's too big of a job. We can't handle it, or I can't handle it. And I would send it up. And so I think there's that really cool back and forth. And I think eventually you kind of climb rungs on that ladder. And for me, what I found is when your quality of work, you know, the quality was always super important to me. Like having quality content and a high-end deliverable was always super important, but it becomes more expensive, like exponentially when you start, you know, working your way into more professional realm. And it's not really, you know, we'd had a conversation earlier about, you know, I can film with my iPhone and get a really fantastic result, but there's a perceived value in having a production or having a setup or having quality equipment or coming with a team. You know, I wouldn't say perceived value, but in all honesty, you know, that's the
perception is reality when it comes to pricing, right? Like if I'm charging $30,000 for a shoot, I can't show up with 4 iPhones.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless it's an iPhone shoot, like unless like it's for Apple.
Crazy, yeah. Although I should test that one day. But in all honesty, like, you know, you have those growing pains, and with growth comes expense, and with expense comes, you know, the maybe the confidence to charge a little bit more because you know your bottom line has shifted. You know, so I think that was kind of the reality check. And also, I want to say this a little bit lightly, but I was receiving pressure from the industry. Like I had a couple of industry peers, they would get on to me and they would come to me and be like, look, like you're undercutting the industry. You know, like you can't charge this amount because it's going to bring us the value of all of our, you know, products down.
Or you can't charge that amount and deliver what you've been delivering.
Yeah. Because I built a reputation on, you know, a quality deliverable. Yeah. But the cost wasn't really aligned with that, you know, because I was younger and smaller and I was willing to take on more. And I was like, yeah, bury me in work and I'll work. Yeah. I'll burn the midnight oil. Now that I have a kid and I'm 36, you know, it's a different equation. Yeah, I want to be home with my family and I want to spend time with my boy and I'm going to work hard and do the hustle. But there's a different value proposition to, you know, my time is valuable for my family. My free time is valuable for my family. So that value proposition is shifted to where, you know, I give the client my 100% during the client's, you know, allotted time or energy or whatever it might be. But I also need to be aware that I need to recharge and reboot and spend quality time with my family so that I can be fresh for my client. Yeah.
So. I think that's a super important just self-awareness there that takes some time to learn and then kind of realize for your own self. Can I ask you about why video? Like, do you remember the defining moment that you said, okay, this is what I want to do? Because you it seems like you went to school and you're pretty set on it. So
yeah, I remember early on in high school, I was into photography and we had these really, you know, like, we live in a beautiful place for one. So it's no secret that Western North Carolina is just absolutely stunning. So to be able to capture that and portray that has always been a passion of mine. So I'd always had a vested interest in photography. And then in high school, I was kind of seen as that, I would make the little, class trip videos, and I was affiliated with, yearbook and that sort of thing. So I think it was a natural fit in high school to, one, enjoy and appreciate technology, but then have that understanding that I can share this. I can share these moments. I can share these, beautiful, things that if I were to go up on the parkway and capture a sunrise, I can share that with my friends and family, and my mom, for instance, isn't going to get up at 5:30 in the morning and hike 3 miles to see this beautiful sunrise, but I can capture it and I can share it with her, so kind of cool to have that, ability this day and age to immediately share with somebody something that, that's profound or beautiful or inspiring. So and then also we were into skateboarding, so we'd make all these skate videos, and it was just like I enjoyed the technology and I enjoyed capturing. So I need to dig up my early videos because they're horrible and they're good and they're fun.
What was your first camera?
Oh my gosh! So for video, so my first still camera was a Canon AE1, I believe, and then I got the A1. So the AE1 didn't have the little digital display; it just had a little ticker that went across to show you the exposure. And then the A1 had like digital display and, all the cool features of the day. And then for video, I had this little Sony Handycam. You remember the Handycams? And you put the little digital or the Hi8 tape in it. And so we were like outfitting those. We put like a little hood on the front. We put a microphone on the top, and then we put a handle on it. So while we're riding our skateboards, we put it down low. So that was really like, it was fun, and it was all like consumer level equipment, but it had potential for really back then quality content.
Oh, for sure.
But then the editing was a mess. I mean, you would have 2 VCRs and you would queue up one tape and queue up another tape, and you'd hit play on this one and hit record on this one. And then you would feed audio into it from like a Walkman. But it was fun. Yeah. That's how you learn.
Yeah. I'm of the mind that like skateboarders who tried to document some of the stuff, and like Dungeons and Dragons players or World of Warcraft players are like the best entrepreneur, business builder types, because
to
play those games when we were kids and earlier, especially earlier probably, but to play in our generation and earlier, you needed to be creative problem solver who could just envision an outcome and do a lot of hard work to make it so. Like a kid who's into skateboarding and wants to make a video today, it's like, you do it, there's, iMovie on your phone, and it's pretty intuitive and it's pretty clean. And like the sweat equity that you put into, film as a child is different than someone today using reels. And it's not necessarily better or worse. I would always defer to someone who's, played Warcraft for hours on end than played Candy Crush.
Yeah. And there's that sense of determination and resilience that I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it again, and then I'm going to do it again. And if it's not working, we tend to beat our heads against the wall or just give up. And I'm always, of the mind of, I'm going to beat my head against the wall until I either fix it or break it.
Yeah.
And that's the determining factor. So I've always been really, resilient and resourceful in that sense. So, I think that is a trait, the resourcefulness of, how do I do this better or differently, or how do I look at it from a different angle so that I can find success in it, and it was back to that skateboarding, Dungeons and Dragons mentality. Anybody who's pursuing something, to better themselves or better their craft, or to just like, improve upon, I think that's a valid, pursuit. Yeah. And there's a great Jerry Seinfeld quote. I think he said it in the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee show, where they were watching these skateboarders, and he's like, you know what? He's like, those skateboarders, he's like, I never worry for them. He's like, they're going to be all right. He's like, because they're just so determined, like a kickflip's a really hard thing to do, like, or whatever it might be. So in either case, that's a whole nother, like, whole nother conversation. But I think, determination, resilience, resourcefulness, those are all valid on any level.
Yeah. So I imagine after being in the business for 15 years, there's been a lot of learning moments and mistakes, for the lack of a better word. But tell us a little bit more about those moments where you were like, okay, I just learned something new. I'm going to change the way I do my business. Or, oh, I just made a mistake. Shouldn't have done that. Now I know I'll do it differently this time.
Yeah. And I think, making mistakes is a fact of life. It's a fact of business, a fact of everything we do. I think it's how we respond to those mistakes that makes the biggest difference. So in all honesty, I've made a ton of mistakes throughout my career. Fortunately, I started small enough to where when I would make a mistake, I would only go down so far. You can only, if you're only one rung up on the ladder, you can only go back down one rung, So then, it does become a little more stressful to make higher level mistakes when you are higher on that rung. Like, for instance, of this podcast, if you guys accidentally lost your card or deleted the podcast, that's a tough one to swallow. It's a tough one to admit.
It's happened.
I've been there, man. My heart hurts so bad every time.
So I don't know. It's kind of tough to say where the mistakes happen and how they're caused. And sometimes it's uncontrollable. Say I were to lose a memory card, and it's happened a few times. I tore my car apart one time after a shoot where I don't do this anymore, but there was a time when I would take the memory card and I would just find a happy place for it. And then I would get back to the office and I'd drop it off to Emily, our editor. And sometimes that happy place was my pocket. And I put the memory card in my pocket, which to me right now is saying it sounds absurd. Now we have like hard cases and we have like tracking tiles on them. So we know where the content's at. And usually it doesn't come out of the camera until it gets to the office. But I had one time where I lost a card entirely. And there was no way I was going to ever allow myself to call that client and say, hey, I lost your content. So I literally tore my house apart. And I went as far as I was determined that I'd lost it in my car. And so I went out and went as far as to taking the seat out of my car, entirely taking the seat out of my car and looking up under the rugs and looking under the vents. And I took my seat, flipped it over in the garage and shook on it. And sure enough, the card fell out.
What?
It was down inside the seat belt part of my seat.
Oh my gosh.
But I think, that sort of thing where it's either figure it out or have that really hard discussion tomorrow with your client, because you do one or the other. It's a lot of it's holding yourself accountable to a level where you either fix the mistake or you admit fault and you fix it. There are times when things don't work, in production or whatever it may be, but my job is to make it right. At the end of the day, I have signed up for this deliverable and they need to have it. If I'm building a house for somebody or remodeling their kitchen, I can't just say, oh, I hit a pipe and water blew everywhere and I'm just going to leave. Sorry. You have accountability and you signed up for it. I will say one of the biggest mistakes I made that I still don't, it's still such a tricky scenario with all creatives. I kind of want to give this as not something for creatives to freak out about, but sales tax. So we learned back in 2014, 2015 that I got a call from the North Carolina Department of Revenue, and they said, "Hey, we want to see your books. We see that you're not paying sales tax." So, oh, well, I'm a creative and I'm delivering, I'm not delivering a product. So why am I entitled to pay sales tax? So they looked at our books. He came back every other week for 3 months and asked for all this information. And ultimately, they sent us a really big bill for 3 years of sales tax. Everything we've ever done for 3 years, they wanted 7% of it. And that was devastating to my business, just absolutely traumatizing. And I sleep great, I don't worry about when I'm checked out, I'm present, I'm with my family, but I was losing sleep. I was stressing. I was calling everybody I knew. And so ultimately I called I got a hold of a tax attorney who used to work for Department of Revenue. And he said essentially that if you can taste it, touch it, smell it, breathe it, it's a tangible. So even video is a tangible. And not to freak out all you other video guys out there, but it can be deemed a tangible, and which means that it's subject to sales tax. And so he essentially said, there's nothing I can do about it. He's like, if they want to fathom that up, and he said, he told me when I used to work for Department of Revenue, he's like, we would come up with things, we would sit around and say, okay, how can we go after this line of potential revenue that is not being billed sales tax or not deemed taxable? So they'd come up with a scenario that fit that mold, and then they'd, deem it appropriate to tax. And so I had been warned in the past that, yeah, you should probably charge sales tax. But in my mind, and with the general, community thought and the creative world that, that I ran in, it wasn't really an issue.
Whoa.
Until it was.
So it's tangible in so much as there are hard drives involved, or in that
you're delivering
plays on.
Yeah, you're delivering, so the video is a deliverable.
Yeah.
But you can see it and you can hear it, so therefore it's a tangible. So your deliverable, everything you do leading up to that deliverable, is deemed ultimately a product, an end product, which is, it can be argued both ways, but in the view of the law, or at least his perspective of the law, it was.
Holy moly! All right, so
that's you asked. Not a mistake.
That's a big lesson.
Yeah,
10% of what you thought was profit, kind of disappearing is very
over 3 years. So we didn't have that in the bank. You take a 3-year process and you forecast. You say okay, every month I know what I have, and I'm going to, a year from now, if I show a profit, I'm going to possibly buffer that profit back into the business, invest or buy equipment or whatever it might be, market. So you don't have that money lying around 3 years later.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a heavy blow, but it was a massive learning curve. And it was one of those reality checks of resilience. Okay, are we resilient? Can we take a punch? Can we take a hard hit and not topple over, And I think that, ultimately it makes you stronger. It really does. We learned a lot, and we implemented charging sales tax, and we were true to it. And we had a lot of, pushback from clients. But, I had something to fall back on, and a lot of people didn't. So I would send the letter from the IRS.
Exactly. I was just like, but this is our letter. We have to.
Yeah. So
wild.
Anyway,
I think it's a huge deal, and I think that it's easily overlooked, and one of the biggest things to just skate by. I'm always play fast type who will say, let revenues solve the problem. But sometimes it does make sense to be a planner.
Yeah.
And I think Sarah and I have a yin yang in that respect, where it's I'm let's move fast, let's solve it with revenue. But if you're not putting money aside, and you're a small business owner or a side hustler or selling stuff on eBay, whatever you want to whatever you are, it makes sense. When I first left my job in Brooklyn and we were thinking about moving, I went so far as to put 45% of any money I made into a savings account called taxes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because I just didn't know. I didn't know what it was going to look like. And I said, I'll solve it with revenue, right? Air quotes, but also I'm going to take about half this money and just assume that it's going to disappear on me. And if it doesn't, then I'm in, that's my tax return at the end of the year, gift to myself.
And that's a great perspective for all entrepreneurs, to have that mindset of sustainability or having a plan B or whatever it might be. So there's this phrase in the photography industry, and I'm sure it crosses other industries as well, but that luck favors the prepared. And I've found that if I can prepare myself for whatever it may be, say it's a beautiful sunrise, to know where I'm going to be in advance, to know where the sun's coming up, to maybe go and pre-scout, to know what equipment I'm going to bring. And then in that moment when 7 a.m. comes around on that morning that I want to capture this beautiful sunrise, I'm standing exactly where I need to be. I know where the sun's going to come up. I know what equipment I need to make for a successful end result. And the same is true in business. If you can prepare for those, unforeseen, maybe fog rolls in while I'm trying to capture the sunrise. So I know of a waterfall half a mile back, and I'm just going to go capture the waterfall. So I've kind of pivoted, but I'm still prepared. I'm not, I didn't waste 3 hours of my morning and get up at 5 a.m. to capture something, to not come home with anything. So I think that perspective, that mindset of luck favoring the prepared, having that perspective in business where you're forecasting for those unknown variables and you're able to pivot, or you're able to become lucky because you prepared yourself. You worked super hard to land this type of client, and when that client comes into your lap, you are ready for them. You have all of the tools in place. Or when you get audited by, the IRS or, the state, you, in my opinion, unfortunately for me, I wasn't prepared, but I learned from that. Yeah. The preparation is integral, so having those moments of growth and learning and saying, okay, I'm going to file that away in, future understanding, to know that next time I'm going to be prepared.
The stove is hot. I think that there's something to be said about, like, my brother burned himself on a poo-poo platter when we were kids. And I remember it being so traumatizing for probably him, but definitely for me. Huh. I learned, I needed to be in it next to him. My hand never got burnt. Yeah. But it's when you're close to someone where it's happened, I think this points back to the community thing. This points back to, like, can I learn from you? Yeah. Or do I need to lose the memory card myself to know that we need a very robust memory card process that's going to be with a tile on it? I think it perhaps depends on the person, but I try wherever I can. I'm a younger brother. I try wherever I can to learn from the mistakes and missteps of my older brother. Yeah. In this instance, you. I'm like, Sarah, are we selling a product? Like, do we need to go back and prepare for the 18 months of 7%? Maybe. I don't know. But, like, I'm going to have a call with our accountant this week to see what's going on.
You'll educate yourself, and you'll have a better understanding. And I think we all take nuggets from each other. And that's what I love about the community mindset. It's not just I'm selling your product and you're selling my product and we become each other's sales force, but we're also sharing ideas and we're growing together and we're learning from each other. And that's the beauty of having, Asheville is such a profound example of that. Having a really open and accepting and understanding community where people, they want to share, and I love that in our town. And you guys having this podcast is a prime example of that. And I really love the concept of what you guys are doing. When I first met you, it was just a concept, but to say, like, I'm going to take this and run with it. I'm going to make something of it. And then I'm going to share it with my community to where it no longer becomes really your podcast. It is, you guys are hosting it, but it's now like a community platform, and I listen to you guys all the time. And it's like, I'm learning things about people that I've known for years, Lisa and Dean Petit or Miles Alexander, I've known them for years, but I listen to the podcast. I'm like, wow, like, this is a breadth of information. This is a wealth of knowledge. Like, these are things that I can take notes and I can go back and listen to again, or I can, study up, So yeah, it's a fantastic, community. And I think we all really should be cognizant of what we're absorbing, and then not only what we're absorbing, but what we're doing with it and how we're sharing or perpetuating it.
Yeah. Which I'm curious to know more about other resources, either locally or even nationally, internationally, that have really helped you learn and shaped a lot of what you do in your business. Is there I don't know, 3 or 4 that really stick out to you?
So early on in my business, I had a little office in Hendersonville. And I had this guy show up one day, and he's wearing a suit and a tie, and he has a clipboard, and he shows up at my office, and I thought, I'm like, man, am I in trouble? Like, he says he's with the Chamber of Commerce. I'm like, oh, like, I really did something. I didn't even know what the chamber was, right?
Yeah.
It's the jail. It's a jail for people in business. That's what it sounds like,
and
right?
It sounds so intimidating. But once I realized, and Bob Williford, he's the chamber executive down there. I'm still good friends with him today, but I remember that moment so vividly. He showed up in my office and he invited me to the chamber. And I was like, well, I'm like 23. I'm like, am I too young for this? Like, I don't even know. And so I show up to a chamber event and I loved it. Like it was like-minded people who were just looking to learn from each other. And so,
was this the chamber in Hendersonville or?
Well, originally, and I'm still a member of it. It's a little tougher for me to get down there, typically. Well, now, obviously everything's virtual, but having our studio in Asheville, to drive from Asheville and be at a, noon or 5 p.m. chamber event. So I also joined the chamber in Asheville once I learned the ropes of the benefits of the chamber. So I've been a co-member of both chambers for years, and even just to go to an after hours and just to rub shoulders with people and get to know them. And I think that's such a valuable resource, even if you don't talk business one bit. And there are times when I will go in kind of as that blank slate and leave my cards aside and just listen and learn, because I think that can be more valuable than landing a lead. If you can just be that sponge to other people's journey or story or inspiration. So I think the chamber is a very beneficial way to become a part of your community. And then finding these give back opportunities. My wife works with the YWCA, so I'm very fortunate to have this family, honestly. Like the YW to us is a family. Like our boy goes to daycare there. My wife works in a women's empowerment program there. And they're doing such amazing things for the community that you want to be a part of that. And I think everybody has that, whether it be their church group or their, community, there's something out there for everyone. It's not hard to look around Asheville and find something to latch on to and to be a part of. And if it's a give back or nonprofit or something of the sort, even better. But I think that the chamber was very integral. Young Professionals of Asheville, I'm very involved in. I've been on the board, a number of times over the course of my 10-year membership, probably, and I started when YPA was in its infancy. And so it was really fun to watch that group grow. And the cool thing about YPA is that you never know where these people's journeys are leading them. A lot of people join YPA when they're very young, and then they go on to be future leaders of our community. They could be the next mayor, and so I've always seen everyone in YPA as that person, you could be the next mayor of our town. I want to really get to know you, because you never know where people are going and you never know what they have to offer and what value they have to provide. So I think groups like that, especially the younger groups, I think we should latch on and really advocate for and really help perpetuate, so that group, especially, in my opinion, we're molding through groups like that. We're molding our future local leaders, so really fun.
So I love all three of the shout outs of chamber, some sort of service, nonprofit group, and then younger groups, or I'll call it a demographic group. So I know that there's some continual learning group at UNCA that I can't remember what it's called, OSA, but everyone talks about it. They say it's the greatest group. And it's mostly, retirees are this continuous lifelong learners. What about specific to video? Was there anyone that you've ever drafted off of, whether they're a YouTuber, we're clearly all in the shadow of a Casey Neistat who exploded 10 years ago and had the HBO show, but is Chase Jarvis someone that inspired you? Because this studio setup, to me, I'm oh my God, I'm on Creative Live. We're watching a Creative Live studio.
Yeah.
So I wonder who's been important to you in video.
Yeah, and those names for sure. I used to follow Chase Jarvis a lot more than I do now, but back in the infancy of YouTube and the creative sharing of ideas, he was an open book. he would give it all away. Zach Arias, I don't know if he's more of a like, he shoots a lot of like band photography, musician photography, like really cool stuff. He's based out of Atlanta. And so I followed him for years and actually met him randomly in a coffee shop one time and was like starstruck.
I love it.
Something small. Like I think it was something for, anyway, we were down there and I just happened to walk into a Starbucks and he's sitting there playing with the new camera that and so I'm like, whoa, this is a moment, so I latched on and I went over there and I'm like, hey, like, do you mind if I just talk to you for a minute? It's probably super awkward. Yeah, so I think having people like that are just a wealth of knowledge and they're willing to give it away. They're willing to just tell you all their trade secrets. And that 10 years ago was unheard of. And then, people like, I think, Chase Jarvis was really known for that. Like, and people in the industry got mad at him. They're like, why are you giving away all these trade secrets that we've taken years and years to develop? And it was because he cared. He wanted to push this thing forward. And I think a lot of us learn from people like him. Locally, Keith Wright. I'll give a quick shout out to Keith Wright. He does amazing. I don't know if you know him, but he does really cool stuff. Like he's mostly on the commercial side, so he doesn't do a lot of work Asheville centric. Maybe he does. Keith, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But I went into his studio, I remember like ages ago, it seems like, and it was probably only like 8 years ago, but I went in with like the iPad 1, like the original iPad. I'd loaded up 40 or 50 photos on it, whatever it would hold. And I had him critique my images.
Yeah.
It was like, for me, it was like such a leap of faith to go into someone else's studio who I admired and trusted and really sought to mimic and say, hey, can you tear apart my photo gallery? Can you just give me the real and raw rundown of how good my work is? And he was super kind. I look back, and the images that I showed him are, now I see them as, oh my gosh, like what was I thinking? These are horrible, but they were my best, best back then. And having, I think having, like him being that open door and saying, like I'll critique your photos. It was probably fun for him. It was like the scariest thing ever for me, but I bet he had a lot of fun doing it, because he got to share and inspire and plant a seed, There are lots of people. I mean, I could go on, Paul Bonesteel Films here in town. They do a bunch of really cool work with HGTV and Scripps Network. And so they're always out doing like big high level productions. And so I've always like, and we work with the equipment that we have available essentially. Like, like we always see our crew, we've got a tight knit crew and then, we have really nice equipment now, but it's always been like that, you inspire to be like this really high level production team who has it all together and it looks fantastic. It's just, a well-oiled machine. And I've always seen Bonesteel Films as that. Yeah. And when Paul sent me my first gig, I was like, just dumbfounded. When he gave me a lead, when he sent me, my first lead from him, I was just like, wow, he's sending me a lead. He's sending me a client that trusts him and trusts his judgment and his opinion, and that was just a big moment for me. And in years since, I've sat down with them, I picked their brain, Matthew over there, their producer is just, he's just an open book, and he's willing to collaborate and to share and to grow together. So I think you have to sometimes make that little leap of faith and say, I'm going to reach out or I'm going to send an email or get on the phone with somebody. And it may be scary for you, but on the other side of that, there are so many, just amazing opportunities and results and breadths of information and knowledge. So don't hesitate.
I love that. I'm also curious too to learn more about, it sounds like you've done a lot of different types of videos or you've worked with a lot of different types of clients over the years. Yeah. But you've honed it down to maybe more specific industries.
Possibly. So the core of our work really falls in line with tourism, healthcare, manufacturing, and then general like organizations who have an amazing story. There are tons of those. And I think the tourism side really spawned from my love for nature photography. So I still get out a lot. Well, I have a 1-year-old now, so I don't get out as much for sunrise. I can't wait for him to be a little bit older when I can drag him along with me. But yeah, we live in such a beautiful area. I'm always like chasing a beautiful moment. Like I always have this like internal drive to find these beautiful moments. So the nature photography really pushed me into the realm of tourism work. So, a lot of our local tourism is based on the beauty of our region. Sure. And so there are a lot of tourism-based clients, even manufacturing tourism-based clients that have a product that they want to portray in the woods, or they want to portray on a mountaintop, or they want to show it in action, whether it be, a shoe or a bike or a kayak or whatever it might be. There's a lot made here locally. So that, I can see these common threads of like, I have a passion for nature photography. I try and do it really well. And that's allowed me the wealth of information, regarding our region, where to be when the fall colors are at their best, or, what segment of the Blue Ridge Parkway has the most beautiful, winding curvature, just something really as small as that. It takes a lot of time but if I have a cycling client that says, hey, we need somebody road biking on this beautiful road in the fall season, I have an idea of where to be because I've like scouted essentially. And so I think that does position you for opening other doors to like-minded opportunities, whether it be in manufacturing, which could be an outdoor manufacturing entity, or it's in tourism. We do a lot of work with Explore Asheville, and they are the tourism entity of our region. So that's opened a lot of doors because they work with everybody. Mm-hmm. They work with all the big industries in town because they want to bring people to Asheville. Yeah, so I don't remember where we were going with this, but
I'm just wondering, like, if there was ever a moment when you said, okay, I'm done with doing, kids' birthday parties and weddings, and I'm only going to focus on this. And if I get a request from someone to do something else, I'm probably just going to pass it on. Like, how did you think through that process, or was it just sort of natural and you're like, I'm just going to follow the things that I'm interested in?
Yeah, fortunately, I have a great team, and we have a high level of inner accountability, where we will all assess a project and we'll say, is this a good fit? Is it a good fit based on the premise of our values? Is it a good based on the premise of finance and return, timeline? Can we do it within a certain time period? And so we weigh all these variables, and, the biggest one is not always finance. We may do a project for a quarter of, and I'm not going to tell all my clients here, but we may do a project that's a quarter of the cost of another project, but we have to weigh all these variables. Like, can we do it less expensively because we love what they're doing, or we have a little more time? It's dead of winter and, nobody's ringing the phone, so we can afford to do a project for a little less financial gain. Yeah. So we weigh a lot of variables and we do it together, and we have, 2 team meetings a week where we're all assessing every single client, every single opportunity together. So I think now it's a little different, whereas back in the day when I talked about filming anything and everything, a wedding or a kid's birthday party, what have you, like that was just me. Like it was just like, yeah, I'll do the hustle, I'll stay up late. But when I realized that my decision affects other people's responses on my team, I need to be a unified front, and I need to say, okay, like, my decision affects Emily's editing outcome and her timeline and the pressures that she's facing. Or Jennifer, who does our project management, she's going to get a flood of emails from this client who's just, their project super dynamic. So it takes a ton of back and forth emails, so we have to assess this sort of thing and say, okay, like what's a good fit in the current moment based on all these variables.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's a great answer. I'm wondering when you took the first step from I'm Jared K., owner, operator, chief, chef and bottle washer, as they say, to maybe started contracting people to do things downstream or come with you on a shoot. To it sounds like are those three teammates employees today?
Yeah, so way back in the day, I contracted an editor part-time here and there. So I had these, I had a few dynamic projects that required a little more of a heavy lift. So I would contract an editor and I would, work with somebody who was their own entity. But what I started learning early on is that like you have to be very like unified. Like I said, you have to be sure that your process is aligned so that the client receives a consistent result. Especially if you're creating content for them regularly, or if they come back in a year, it needs to look and feel consistent and cohesive. So it's really tough, in my opinion, or was really tough in my opinion, to contract editing out or to contract somebody to write your emails, because it has to be consistent. So we had, in 2012, I had an opportunity to work with Explore Asheville, who I mentioned before, to do this spring time-lapse campaign. So I was really into time-lapse photography, and I was already capturing a lot of, fun nature content. And they came to me and they said, hey, we want to create this spring time-lapse campaign, and you have a month to do it. And I was like, whoa, this is an amazing opportunity. I'd love to, and I have the time allotted, and the budget was, and back then, in my opinion, fantastic. I think it was somewhere in the $6,000 range. When they told me that, I about fell out of my chair. I mean, this was 2012, and to me, that was a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, 7 years earlier, you were looking for $800 a month.
Yeah,
you're at over a year.
Project that was $6,000, and I literally about fell out of my chair. And so I was like, yeah, sign me up, I'll do it. And like I said, it was like an entire month's worth of work. It was a lot of work. But that video gained so much traction and had so much, positive response that they wanted to do it again in the fall. And not only that, but they wanted to work with us on a more regular, engage with us on a more regular basis. So it allowed this opportunity for me to say, okay, now I can possibly afford to bring somebody on in more than a contract, per project basis. And so Jennifer, our project manager, had reached out to me right in that same moment and just sent a random email like, hey, I do project management, just moved to Asheville from Boston with my husband and my little girl. And, do you want to chat? So I wrote back, I was like, yeah, this is perfect. I would love to. So we sat down for coffee and we talked about, all the possibilities and scenarios. And for her, it was a fantastic fit because she had a newborn. She could be flexible in her role. And for me, it was a fantastic fit because I really just needed her to be a liaison to the client, to engage with them and to be, that funnel and filter so that when I received the run of show or when I received like the marching orders, I knew where to be and when. I'm like, literally just tell me where to show up and what to have, in my kit. So that was really a turning point back in 2012 when I brought Jennifer on. And then Emily interned with us. She was in school for broadcast or photojournalism, something of the sort. And she interned with us for a summer. And then she left to go back to school that same summer. This was in 2012. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're lost. Like when you graduate, we need you back. So she came back the next year and worked for us. And they're both, like a very integral part of our team to this day.
Wow.
So yeah, and then we have another team member who helps me, Skylar, who helps me with all the logistics of equipment, setup, breakdown, charging batteries, emptying cards, making sure that everything looks good and sounds good, because we're remote. We get out on location a lot. And so we have to be nimble in someone else's environment. Things have to be seamless. So, he's fantastic with that, so that allows me to be more client centric or story centric, to where I don't have to think about like, oh, is that battery charged? Is that camera running? Is the audio good? Now it's a luxury. I'm like, oh, I just show up and I banter with the client and I, have this cool conversation and then we leave, Wow. It's a lot more than that, but still.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah. I think that those stages of handing some of the work off can be, to certain artists, creatives, entrepreneur types, can be like the hardest learning curves, right? Learning a new skill like not behind a lens or with a boom, isn't nearly as hard as learning the skill of I can't do everything. So 80%, done 80% the way I would have done it, 20% with their own flair. Is that good enough, or does it give me anxiety? And I don't.
Yeah, when you're handing your baby off to someone else and saying, "Hey, make this look good, make this sound good, make this email feel, cohesive and collaborative," and it's like when I first started doing that, that was, oh my gosh, just like the hardest thing ever. Is like pulling teeth, and a lot of times, Jennifer, Emily, or even Skylar will have to pull that away from me and say, like, look, you don't need to be doing this. Like, trust me, I'll do it. And that's a big thing, is like learning to trust other people, and they want to be trusted, but it's really tough for me to take that, like very integral, like passion oriented, whatever it might be, and hand it off to someone else and to say, okay, I trust you. You've got this.
Yeah. Well, and I always struggle with like, well, it's not the way that I would do it. But does that mean it's wrong, or that it's poor quality? And that's what I'm always trying to struggle with in my mind, is like, this is fine. Like, they're still doing a great job. It's just different than the way I would have approached it.
Yeah, and it's allowed to be different. That's but we all as humans have a hard time with that, especially if we're, of my perspective, where I'm very determined. I'm very like, I want to do this my way, and I want to do it, and I think, I'm kind of stubborn in that sense, but I've also learned to understand my own intricacies, for lack of a better word, and to realize that, and to say, okay, like, am I doing that because I'm better at it? Like, am I making the decision because I am truly better at it, or am I only making a decision just because I'm afraid of trusting someone else to do it?
Yeah, for sure. So Jared, what is coming up for you in the future? What projects are you guys working on, or what goals does your business have coming up?
Yeah, this is really good. And as you know, we're in the midst of COVID. So, we have all pivoted. We've either figured out a new way to do it, or we're just not doing it anymore. But fortunately for us, we thought this would be just detrimental to our line of work. Like, who's going to do video during COVID? But what we found is, like, everybody now wants to do something virtually. So we're doing universities virtual campus tours for students who can't come tour the campus right now. We're working with economic development currently to create this virtual experience for high school students who want a job in manufacturing, but they can't go to our manufacturing facility. So we've invested in equipment. We bought a Matterport. Do you know what a Matterport is?
It sounds like something from Dune, honestly. You can teleport maps.
So you've probably seen it a lot in real estate. So like these 360 home tours, where you can go in and you can like see around. You can click and drag your mouse and see around the home. So essentially it's a 360 camera that you set in the middle of a room, and it spins in a circle and it sees everything. And then you move it 5 feet and you do it again. And then there are these like hotspots that show up on the floor wherever you would set the camera. And so you have these like walking paths. So you can map out an entire property, and it's super, super cool. So we did this in 2 facilities, French Broad Chocolate Factory, which if you've never been there, it's the coolest place ever. It's like Willy Wonka's, it's super cool. And then we did it in Industry 9, which is a local bike part manufacturer. They make wheels and spokes and for high-end cycling.
Clint, I think Clint was one of our most like MBA course interviews yet. He was like consummate serial entrepreneur, and what a cool place to do that in.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's like eye candy everywhere. And I'm big into cycling, so like I'm just drooling in there. And I want, So what we ended up, not only did we create the Matterport virtual tour, but we also said, okay, how can we make this an interactive, engaging experience to where there's a takeaway and people have a sense of education or inspiration. And so we created a bunch of independent videos that we could place throughout the tour. So we had little hotspots, and we we have people standing there. Like when you walk in, Clint's standing at the doorway greeting you, and he's in a 360 photo and he's static. But if you click on the little dot that's on his, it'll bring up a video. And so you can watch Clint talk about what their role in the community or their, the difference they're making or whatever it may be. And then you can move throughout the tour further and you can click on one of the employees and you can hear about their journey and their story and how they found upward mobility. And they're now, like a manager in their department or whatever, they get to ride their bike for lunch, for their lunch break.
I know. They're doing it right out there, man. What a cool.
Yeah. It's a really cool culture there. So, being able to tell and share the breadth of why they exist and why you might want a job there as a student and, pursuing a manufacturing career, like I think it just opens up a ton of perspective, and understanding into, manufacturing is not just this dirty, grimy job that my grandpa used to do in a factory. It's got a potentially has a ton of really cool culture and like opportunity for, being a part of something. So that type of approach, us again, being the portrayers of that, not necessarily scripting it or contriving it, but we're just there, we're the platform to tell that story and share that story. So this like 360 virtual tour, like immersive experience is now really a just cool way to tell a story, and it feels like we're kind of pushing into the future of what things are going to start looking like, where it's more immersive.
Yeah, to me it almost sounds like a little bit like some video game, one of those video games where like you're walking through something, right, and you click on a button and like something happens, and that's really cool. Really, really cool.
And in the storytelling sense, I think you've kind of got something there.
How fun.
So, not to give away our new secrets, but
and you have this incredible studio. So at what point did you again, this shout out to the YouTube channel, check out the space, but at what point did you get brick and mortar in Asheville? It seems like you've always had an office somewhere, but was the office also a studio the whole time?
No. So starting in like 2010 maybe, I was tired of rolling out of bed and going to the spare bedroom and calling that my career. I think there was a little bit of a pivot there where I said, okay, I need somewhere where I can like get up, I can get dressed, I can drive there, and then I can separate work from home and work from, so I needed that separation point. So I rented this like $150 a month, old, not just doctor's office, but patient room inside of a doctor's office. They'd been converted to offices. And so I'm renting like this patient room, and it still had like the light you could pull down in the ceiling and like the table where people would, play on. Really creepy. So I was there for a couple of years, and then I moved to a space. Somebody I knew had a space that was up for lease in Hendersonville, so I ended up moving there, and it was all justifiably affordable. Like it was still a stretch, but it gave me a sense of legitimacy, and it also gave me a sense of accountability to where no longer was I just working from home and making the money I needed to make, but I was now like responsible for paying a lease and for having and so I think that's actually a positive. Like a lot of people are really scared to move into like a big expensive office or whatever it might be, but I'll tell you what, like it is a motivating factor like none other. It's like, when you have a kid, you birth a child, like all of a sudden, like life changes. Like you no longer have the option to not care for this child. You no longer have the option to just ignore it and avoid it. And like, you know what I mean?
Well, it's in theory, we know what you mean, but I would never have made that jump because we haven't lived it. But it does. There's a new phase. We have this office. We're shooting this in our new downtown office, and there's a step. Like this is fundamentally we're in a different phase of our business and of our career. This is our baby in some regard. I can absolutely hear that. I imagine bringing someone on full time is a version of that, like responsibility step graph popping up. But holy smokes! Okay, so how long were you in this patient room, which sounds scary and weird and fun?
If you delve into this, probably 2 years, and the majority of that time, I somehow landed this hunting and fishing show. And so I was editing, someone else would film it, but I was editing this mostly hunting show. And it was like good old boy, like, Ned and Ted's hunting and killing. And I was responsible for like this 30-minute show that went on. I think it was the Pursuit Network. And so they would send me all this raw footage. And when I say raw footage, I mean like really raw footage of like, a deer getting shot. And they would like do all the recreates of like loading the gun and stalking the deer and like, making the kill. And it was like, but it paid. It was, I got a pretty steady check from that. And so I think that was 2 years maybe I did. I worked in that space and I had that. So it was really, I don't know why I'm telling this story, but that's the memory of that space was this hunting and killing show.
Holy moly.
Sounds a little bit like a horror, like
in a laboratory, in an operating
room. Never rented out was in there. So I would go in and it was this dark dungeon. It was like half underground. Like you would walk in and it was like really creepy in there. But hey, it was an office. It was a place to call.
You got to hang your shingle somewhere that wasn't your home. I think that's a big step. And so now, how many spaces between that and where you are today?
1, 2. Okay, so we were there, then Hendersonville, and then South Asheville. We leased a space, and now we're here in River Arch District, and we have this big, beautiful space. I mean, it's like 3,000 square feet, and it's phenomenal. And the biggest challenge right now during COVID has been like almost that sense of like, I don't know, it's guilt or pressure or whatever it may be, but like the space has sat vacant. Like we all split off and worked from home since March. And I think a lot of people are feeling this, like I have this big, beautiful space and like, there's no one to share it with. There's no purpose behind it currently, because this is where we would meet clients and this is where we would engage as a team. And this is where we would film, and all that went away like during COVID. And so I had to really have this like internal discussion of like, should we move on and or should we, and it's really tricky when you're in a lease or a mortgage or whatever have you can't just up and vanish, like you have to ride that out. So fortunately for us, we 4 years ago actually bought into this. We purchased. So it's a mortgage, but it's also a really high level of pressure, to say like the bank's not going to go away. Like you have to you either have to make it work or you have to sell it. And for me, like, I can equate this to, that baby scenario again, like you have a child you have to care for, you have to find a way to care for it. And so we started setting up for Zoom conferences and virtual meetings and hosting events like the Chamber's annual meeting, or the YWCA had this persimmon luncheon that was, like really integral to their donors donating money. And they started coming to us during the first few months of COVID and saying, hey, we can't have our event in person anymore. How do we do this? Like, you're the expert in video. How do we do this event? And I'm like, well, we have a studio. We have some equipment. I guess we can do a live, virtual event. I didn't know anything about live events at that point. I'd never even done a Facebook Live. And so like, that was like March. And now this Zoom thing shows up that no one knows anything about. We were all foreign to Zoom back then. And now we're all experts. Every one of us is probably an expert at Zoom. So we had this massive learning curve between March and what is it now, late September, where we've re-outfitted our entire space. And that's why, I have like this really cool setup that I'm, talking to you now in. That's super cohesive, it's clean, it's inviting, and it feels natural. Well, it's as natural as it can in a virtual realm. I can see you in the same eye line as the camera, and I can hear you through a monitor, and I can talk to you through a microphone, and all this is hidden to the guests. They don't notice it, but it exists, and it's, it's integral. And so we found ourselves being this integral part of our community again, where we could say, hey guys, we've got this. Like, if you need it, come to us, we'll make it work. Finances aside, I'm doing it again. I'm saying, okay, like, my goal is not to make money on this. My goal is to be a resource to my community and to find, a level of sustainability. But at the end of the day, like, I want to be sure that like we are contributing, we're asset.
Love it.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic sort of pivot and way to think about things.
So any organization out there, honestly, if you have an event and you need somewhere to host it, let's talk. Like all finances aside, like I want to be sure that people know the opportunities there.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll also add that into the show notes as well, so it's there for everyone to see. I think we're ready to move into our speed round, which is never really a speed round, but it's sort of the final segment of the episode, which is some lighter questions that we'll ask you. I want to know from you, because you seem to know a lot of fantastic outdoor spots. And so for anyone who's maybe listening and really wants to capture Asheville and its surroundings on video or on photo, I don't want you to give away all your secrets.
3 through
but
5.
Where would you recommend people go if they wanted to kind of see something really cool?
It's almost like asking, where is a good restaurant in Asheville? It's always that same question, because I would rather tell you what's not a good restaurant in Asheville, because I know of 3 or 4 that aren't good, but I know of like 100 that are fantastic.
That's a really good point. All right, so where do most people go that's wrong? How about that?
I think most people, the wrong thing to do is to not get out of your car. Like, it's like you get on the Blue Ridge Parkway and you just drive and you show up at an overlook and you sit there. I've seen people that will roll down their window and not even get out at the overlook. And so from my perspective, I think exploring and adventuring a little bit and finding that place that you call your own. When I show up to a new, beautiful place, say it's a waterfall, and I've never been there before, I feel like I'm the first human to ever stumble upon this like phenomenal place that is such a secret that, you know what I mean? Like you have that feeling that like, wow, I found this, like, this is mine. Like this is an amazing moment that is mine and mine only, So sometimes I have a harder time telling people where to go, because then I feel like I'm choosing their adventure for them. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of like the idea, but like if I said like, go to Craggy Gardens, climb up to the pinnacle, here's how long the hike will be, here's what to expect at the top, it just all seems preconceived. And then like you're kind of like giving away the ending, like to a good book, so it is tough sometimes to recommend, because you don't want to give away the ending. You want people to be like, here's a little bit of like, here's a little bit of insight, but you go choose your own adventure.
Well, and it's always kind of like when someone, and I think the restaurant is a great comparison, but when someone tells you, oh, when you go to this city or this place, you have to go to this restaurant. And so then you go and you're like, yeah, it was good, but your expectations were so high and you're expecting something. Whereas when you go and you discover that little spot that no one told you about, it feels like you did it. Yeah. You found that.
All that to say, great reversal on that question. We will ask in that way moving forward. I love that. If there are you a book reader?
Yes. What? Oh my gosh. Every night I read, like, at least, until I fall asleep typically, but that's my thing at night. Like every night I'm
books
reading.
In the last 3 months stand out to you that you'd be like, put it on your nightstand, or in this books that are on other people's nightstands that shouldn't be, however you want to answer it. But what books do you have?
In the library, because I'm just, I'm an avid reader and I bounce back and forth on a lot of different really cool books. Let's see. So recently, I'll give the big like 4 or 5 that really stand out over the last, couple of years. But I love anything David McCulloch, like 1776, or John Adams was such a fantastic book. They even made a
HBO miniseries. So good.
Yeah, definitely fantastic. I love anything to do with history. Let's see. I like a little bit of nonfiction, but a little bit of fiction, but mostly I'm a nonfiction reader. Some of the Eric Lawson stuff, like Devil in the White City, was really good. And then I read Dead Wake, and then I just read something recently of his that was really just fascinating. And I'm blanking. Whatever his new book is.
I think the reason for that is because it reads like a thriller, but it's also a true-ish story from history, as best we can tell. Yeah. I think those are great.
the first book I recall that was like that was what's the one where Unbroken, I think is the name of it,
With
where
prison
he ends
camp.
Life Raft, and then they
made a movie about it.
Anyway, is that the name of the book? Anyway, so I have a hard time recalling what I've recently read, but it's a passion of mine for sure. I'm reading right now the one about it was a plane crash, World War II military plane crash in New Guinea, called something Sri Lanka, I believe. See, I'm butchering the heck out of this. I should have been more prepared.
Okay. That's a surprise speed run. But I think that the David McCullough's and Eric Larson books it tells me a lot about your reading passions. I think that that's a great insight into who you are that we wouldn't have pulled out without you telling us what kind of books you love.
Yeah, definitely. I think the nonfiction history, recent enough history that it's relevant to me. I've seen a lot of like Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. That's a great podcast, by the way. Yeah, I like out on all the time, but he gets really far into like the Greek and Roman and like stuff that's way back that almost seems like methodical. But his World War II and World War I stuff is really worth a good listen.
Awesome, fantastic. Sounds like history. You're a huge history buff.
I mean, I'm not like, I don't really retain it. I don't, I'm not like, I like learning from the past, I guess, and we can all do that, so I think you take a lot of nuggets from past, experience or whatever it might be, and you apply those to the future. Yeah. So it's all relevant.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. If we had a magic wand or someone in our audience had a magic wand, what one thing would you ask for right now?
What would I ask for? Time. 100%. I mean, time is the biggest luxury. It's the most untangible asset, that you can never have enough of. Yeah. So I think, I would rather if somebody said, hey, I'll give you $10 million or I'll give you, 10,000 hours, I'd take the 10,000 hours.
Wow.
Hands down.
Yeah. I agree. I feel like that this week in particular, Tony keeps asking me, what do you need help with? And I'm like, I don't need help with anything. I just need more time. Like, just give me another day.
Yeah. And if anyone ever tells me they're bored, I'm like, man,
what is that like? Yeah. Love that.
Honestly, that's a great answer. Makes me think of the movie Click, which I think is a sleeper film. Always tugs on my heartstrings. It's got Cranberries music in it. But check out the movie Click, and then and I'll do a preemptive shout out to your Instagram account, which has some of the most beautiful photos on it. But if our audience wanted to connect with you on the World Wide Web, where might you send them?
Yeah. Instagram's a good place. I mean, it's a little less active. It's a little more passive, I think. If you comment on Instagram, I'll comment back, and I'll chat with you there. Facebook is, probably a little more active. You can find me on the web pretty readily. If you want to chat, social media, email, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. Sometimes we hit a busy spot and I just can't get back. So hit me up again. If you don't jump out on my radar the first time, it's not because I'm ignoring you. We might be busy, but I always love chatting with people. So let's see. The Instagram is a great place to just see like local beauty and to find. I try and respond to people on like, oh, where like you'd asked earlier, where is that beautiful place, or how can I see something that's profound, sunrise, landscape, mountainous. But I would say any of that. I'm pretty easy to get hold of.
And we'll have links to all of the known channels in the descriptions below on the show notes page. But thank you very, very much for joining us this morning, Jared.
Yeah, likewise. It was such a pleasure, and I honestly feel like I'm talking to old friends. Like it's just such you guys made it very comfortable and natural and enjoyable. Thank you.